segment of the webinar, we are interviewing a phenomenal lady called Wendy van Eyck. She doesn't think that she's phenomenal, but let me tell you, she is. We met at a random writers conference probably 10 to 15 years ago. And you know how people just connect on LinkedIn because you met someone? And a couple of years later, I was working on a peer-to-peer fundraising project at a university. I kept seeing Wendy van Eyck's posts about this. So I contacted her and we worked on a project together. And in that time, what I discovered was that she had created her own career path. And I was fascinated. How did she shift from being an employee to being a consultant and actually leveraging skill sets that were sellable? So welcome, Wendy. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Cheryl.
Now, Wendy, I want to dive right in because you have a lot of insights that I want people to glean. So number one, you're not conventional, right? I've learned a lot from you on how to design my own career pathway. Please share with your viewers what I know about your journey.
Yeah, so I think I've never I think I've always been very entrepreneurial and I've always been hardworking. So when I was thinking about how to answer this question, I remembered that before I was even legally allowed to work, so I was probably like 13, 14, I actually started my own little business where I would make like beaded necklaces and I'd sell them at various hotels and establishments around. And I also actually like edited and wrote a little guidebook to the tourist town that I lived in. And I took that and I sold it at various hotels and establishments. And when I was 16, I was still doing all those things and earning pocket money on the side. And I also then started working at a supermarket on the weekends. So on Friday afternoon and Saturday and Sunday, I would go and I'd work as basically as a cashier and earn money. And so I've always, I guess, had a bit of a different path, even at a very young age, in that when my friends and that kind of thing would have been playing or doing things, I was starting little businesses and finding jobs and earning money and kind of like, I'm always like a bit of a saver, like that's within my ways. I guess I always felt like I needed more money. And so I did that. And then I didn't know what to study for university. And I went and I started studying journalism. I did a year of that and then decided to change tracks and went and studied paramedics. And I did a year of that. And I decided to stop studying that really for my own emotional health. I really wasn't coping with the course at all. And I was in a position where I was able to take a year off, not so much because I was like financially stable. I know I'm sitting in a position of white privilege. So it's easy for some of the people that I'm talking to think, oh, well, she doesn't know anything about my experience. And I 100% don't know anything about your experience. But my experience was my parents couldn't afford for me to pay for my university tuition. So I'd had to pay for my own university tuition, which I did through getting student loans, which granted, I think is a lot easier with white skin and white parents, with student loans. And I didn't have a car, so I used to walk to university. I used to have waitressing jobs that I'd do in the evening. I continued paying for all of this with my other little side hustles that I had, my necklace making and that kind of thing. So when I quit those 2 degrees, it was super huge for me because I knew that I had huge student loans to pay back. And now I had no degree that I was getting. I was very depressed. I went to a psychologist to work through what was happening inside of me. And they basically said to me, there are 2 ways to get through this depression: go on antidepressants or take a year out of your life. And I decided to take a year out of my life, knowing I still had all this like baggage that I'd have to deal with. And I came out of that and I decided just for myself, I needed to finish something. So I went and finished my degree in communications, which was the first degree that I'd started because I felt like it was the easiest one. But at that point, like I was at such a low in my life that I really also just wanted to finish something and to feel like a success in that way. But even while I was doing that, I had these student loans to pay back. And so I went and I finished off with UNISA and I worked and studied at the same time and did it part-time to reduce my costs. And then also to be able to start paying back the student loans. So I would pay back like 300 rand a month, as much as I could, just to try and get somewhere. I was still struggling with the fact that I didn't have a car, so it limited the jobs that I could do. I was doing a lot of contract jobs. I mean, I've done everything from being a 2-week temp in a legal firm to looking after kids to standing in a supermarket asking people if they'd like to taste yogurt. Like pretty much there's like a informal job that you can do. I used to teach computer skills to toddlers. I mean, seriously, I did everything you can imagine. And then I finally finished my degree and I was like, well, I've got this degree. I should actually like try do something that's more than all these little odd jobs. And I was very fortunate to find a position as a scriptwriter in TV. And lots of people try really long time, really hard times and lots of different ways to get into TV. And mine just happened through networks. I think that's one of the key things I've learned is that you get jobs through people that you know, generally. It's very unusual. I think of the work that I've done at any point in my career. And I know I look quite young, so I'm going to tell you my age. I'm 38. So I was 25 at that time. All of the jobs that I've had between the ages of 18 to 38 almost have come through people that I know. I think there are two that I can remember that have come through me actually applying for something online, blind kind of application. So I guess if I'm going to give a tip, that's one of my key tips to give now is get to know people. Don't do it to get a job. Just do it because you're actually interested in people. And so I got this job working in TV. But before I did that, I actually wrote down what I wanted in this job after I'd finished my degree. And I wrote down things which are pretty ridiculous if I look back at it now. But it was things like I already knew that I wouldn't fit well in a corporate environment. So I wrote down I didn't want to work in a corporate. I wanted to be able to wear clothes like I'm wearing now every day. I wanted to have flexibility in terms of when I could arrive at the office and leave. And those were all things that I actually found in the TV industry without even like planning particularly for it. It was still quite corporate in that it was one of the bigger production houses in South Africa. So there were about 350 staff members. So because of that, they did have to have things that like kept you all in line and policies for stuff. But it fitted a lot of the things that I wanted to do.
Wendy, I just had to stop you for a second because you have such an amazing story that I think if you continue, I might miss some very salient points. So what you've been talking about already is just sharing, a work ethic that you've had for many years in terms of entrepreneurial traits that maybe you didn't even know you had at the time because other friends were wanting to socialize and you were like, let's make money somehow. We could unpack why that was a need for you, but that's, I think, maybe another webinar. What I think we also have in common is because we are both in biracial relationships, we're very aware of our sense of identity and self and what privilege we've had versus other people. But I think also just what you shared in terms of your non-linear career path is that you've tried different things. You were trying to figure things out. I think that's so important. You mentioned working with getting jobs through people. So that's social capital that perhaps first generation students don't have access to. They can build that, so what you're actually sharing, Wendy, is a universal experience of figuring out who you are. And I love that you mentioned that you actually started having a sense of, but what do I want for a job? Let me write down, what do I want to do? What kind of work do I want to do? And that self-awareness that you had around the type of environment and, what you kind of will make it easy for you, that environment awareness. I think that's something that's so crucial because most people just look at salary or I want to work with this company, but not having a sense of what are my work values, what do I value, and how can I actually bring my best to work? So I wanted to unpack that and then you can continue.
Well, I think one of the things you just mentioned there at the end, Cheryl, around looking at the environmental values that I wanted. When I actually started working in TV, I was earning less than I'd been earning in my odd jobs. And so it wasn't a case of looking at finances at that point. I really was looking at, is this an environment and something that I want to be in? Because I think at the time I was earning about 8,500 Rand through odd jobs and various things that I did per month, which was actually really good. And then when I took this TV job, I think they paid me something like 6,500. So it was quite a big cut when you have like rent to pay. And by that stage, I'd managed to start paying for a car. So I had monthly payments on a car and food and things like that. To suddenly not have the availability of 2,000 Rand a month would be quite a big thing, except that I kept on doing all the side hustles at the same time.
So Wendy, can I ask you this question? What made you decide to make that move? What made you decide to sacrifice that 2,000 Rand that you were getting that you needed for this specific opportunity?
I think for me, I've also had like quite a long-term goal in mind with my life. Like I've been able to sit back when I quit paramedics. And one of the reasons I quit it was because I couldn't see any old paramedics. So people, when I looked beyond, I was 20 at the time, when I looked beyond, I couldn't see paramedics that were like 40 or 50. They all did it till they were like 30 or 35. And then either they left or they unfortunately passed away through reckless lifestyle behaviors. And that was like something I've always wanted in life, was some kind of like career path, I guess. And so I think I could see that by leaving my odd jobs, I wasn't creating any kind of long-term path for me. I needed to get into something that had more of a career path, that would give me experience, that would give me skills, and that would give me the options. That's the other thing I always want in life, lots of options. And I felt like this would give me more options in terms of where I could go next and what I could do next, having that kind of groundwork and foundation.
So I love that you mentioned that, because, yeah, actually just the profound realization that you didn't see any older paramedics. When we get into specific career paths, we often don't have that foresight to say, where is this pathway going? How do I see myself, kind of progressing, or is this a kind of dead end street, which is what you've noticed. So what was the moment for you when you realized that the conventional path was not something you wanted to take? Was it at that moment when you took the TV job?
So, I mean, even within that, I could have stayed in a conventional path in TV. For 7 years, I did really stay in a conventional path in TV. I was a scriptwriter who became a producer, who became a marketing manager, who went back to production. I produced live TV shows every night. I worked as a director. I had the opportunity to become the head of the channel eventually, which was a DSTV channel. I then later started another DSTV channel. I had that option to really stay in that pathway that I was going in, and I was growing at a very fast rate. I had a lot of people who were older than me in the industry who felt like, how was I getting ahead at such a young age? But then I decided that I was bored, which maybe isn't the best reason to leave a job, but I am very much the type of person who likes to try new things. And for me, trying new things and growing is very important. So when I was in the TV industry and I was learning new stuff, so I'm learning a scriptwriter, I'm learning to be a producer, I'm learning to be a director, I'm learning to run a channel, I'm learning to start a channel from scratch. For me, those are all challenges. They were things that excited me. Once it became, I've now done this for 2 years and I'm doing the same thing every day, I needed a new challenge. And so for me, I don't know if there's necessarily been a moment, to come back and answer your question, where I've been like, okay, I need another pathway. I think a lot of it is built into my personality, which is like, I need a challenge. And yeah, I left TV at that point because I needed a new challenge. So,
Wendy, I can definitely identify with you on that one. I think it's the distinction between, are you an entrepreneur or are you entrepreneurial, right? So you can develop entrepreneurial thinking in a job, but there are certain personality types. I think you and I are similar, because when I was working in universities, after doing annual reports for 2 years, I thought, well, I want to do something new. And after doing fundraising and maybe getting a certain target, like, okay, what else can I do? I've got this down. So it's almost like there's a hunger to grow and the hunger for a skill set. So is that kind of when you realize, but I can actually design my career path? I'm getting bored of this. I mean, you kind of being very blasé about your TV work, which is quite impressive. But for you, it was like, let's do something else. Is that kind of the point where you're like, how can I design my career? What do I want to do? Tell us more about that.
So I think really becoming intentional about how I design my career came around the time that I decided to leave the TV industry. My husband and I got married at some point during this, and my husband and I decided that we wanted to design our lives together. So he works in an industry where a lot of the time he would need to be overseas and traveling. And so there was an option where we would possibly be able to live overseas for 2 years. And then it was a case of, well, how would we do this? Like, I wouldn't want to just go live there and have nothing to do. I wouldn't be able to get a visa to work. And so then we started thinking about, well, what kind of career could I do that would allow me to work overseas? What kind of jobs could I do? And I then at that point went, okay, what I need is a non-location based career. And that really also suited a lot of the values that I have. A lot of the values I have are around like freedom to move, to own my own time, to do my own things, to not be restricted by things around me. And because of that, I started while I was at TV volunteering for a nonprofit organization who I knew would be willing to allow me to work overseas if my husband went, because of various factors. And so I volunteered for them about 15 to 20 hours a week on top of my full-time job in TV. So that's why when I said I've always been entrepreneurial and hardworking, those two things have gone together. So I was volunteering 15 to 20 hours a week for a year. And after that year, they said to me, we have a position opening as a marketing manager. Would you like to take it? I then said yes, because it fitted a lot of the things that where I wanted to go. And I took that position and they said to me, oh, but we don't have space in our office for you. You're going to have to work from home. I went, yes, because this fitted within the role, like the career path that I was trying to carve out for myself, being non-location based. So the fact that they actually accelerated it for me was just an advantage, because it then gave me the opportunity, which a lot of people have now discovered during COVID. So this was back in 2012, I think, when working remotely wasn't really a thing, especially in South Africa. And even though we were in the same city, I wasn't in the office all the time. I'd go in once a week really for like a weekly check-in, and the rest of the time I worked from home. And it gave me the opportunity to build up trust and credibility with the organization that I was working with, that I didn't need to be in a space to actually get my work done. And then that gave me the freedom to later, we ended up not moving overseas for 2 years, but I moved from Johannesburg to Port Elizabeth, where I currently live. And I continued in that role for about 2 years before I decided actually that I wanted to change once again. And I then changed and became an independent consultant that now consults to all kinds of, to various different nonprofits. So I don't know if I managed to answer your question there.
You have answered my question in wonderful ways. Actually, what I got from what you shared now is that you were bold enough, maybe just because you were bored, or you just like, well, I'm going to keep trying and keep moving forward with what I know I want to do. You've actually found a way to decide that work has to fit into my life, and versus what we know is the conventional way of fitting my life around work. So I think that's pretty phenomenal. And also, just as you kept taking a step, you kind of said, well, I want to go this direction, not always maybe knowing where the path is going to lead, but actually having things fall into place. Like, for example, the remote work, moving to PE. I want to just also then touch on what you said about you and your husband. And I think this is something I also found very interesting, is that you both have a shared vision to live an unconventional life. I think if maybe one of you was more kind of go and get a permanent job, stay in this job, we need the security, it might not have worked. So how important is it to have your core relationships support this journey into the unknown?
I think definitely having them support it is vital. Like you don't necessarily need to be in a relationship like my husband and I, where we both are doing a similar kind of thing. But having somebody who's actually like, yes, I believe in you, and that no matter what happens, we'll figure this out, makes a huge difference. For me, I think in some ways he's probably pushed me more than I would have. I do tend to err more on the side of safety and security. And I maybe wouldn't have made some of the steps that I made as soon as I did. Or, for example, when I left the nonprofit that I used to work for, I left with no plan. Like I had no plan, no real clients, and so that was terrifying. And so without his actual support saying, do you know what, we don't have any plan, but we'll figure out how to live on one salary until you are able to bring in an income, really made a huge difference. But then I think it's been like mutual support, because last year during COVID, I was in a position where I didn't lose any of my work because I actually work with a lot of public health organizations, so they were needed more than ever. But he lost 90% of his work in 24 hours. And so then the reverse was happening, where it was now actually me stepping up and saying to him, like, yeah, we don't have a plan and we don't know what we're going to do. And we're back to living on one salary, but we've done this before and we can do it again. And so just having those people in your life that are like, I've got your back, is definitely necessary, because it is like a lonely thing really to be not doing the conventional thing that everyone else does.
Yes, it's lonely, and that's why I'm so glad I have you. Because every now and then I pick in and say, Wendy, this is where I'm at. You're like, no, it's fine, Cheryl. You're in the right direction. It's okay. Things will work out. And I'm like, oh, shoot. Something that you mentioned, I want to touch on. It's not in my questions, but I think it's so vital. The fact that you and your husband have at different stages had to work on one salary. And when I do the training with Whole Person Academy, we definitely look at relationships, career, finances, because most South Africans, most people in the world are actually living paycheck to paycheck. So we've seen the devastation now with this global pandemic, where if you haven't had what people have been saying for years, have a 6-month emergency fund, don't live on high consumer debt, keep your debt to a minimum. We see that's essential now. We can't just avoid that. We think, oh, it's a nice to have. And this is why people are staying in jobs they hate and actually short circuiting their passion and their purpose, because they get themselves stuck in a consumer culture. Now, I know I've met you and your husband a few times, actually your husband once, but you are not a consumeristic couple. Is that a word? Yeah. You're not driven by consumerism. So you've been able to live below your means, and this is how you can adapt to the shifting financial realities that unconventional career paths bring. How important has it been for you guys to have a solid financial kind of habits and patterns in your life to keep you going?
Yeah, so like I said, I always tend to the side of safety and security. And so for me, safety and security involves knowing that I have the money that I need to survive. Like I said, I started off as a teenager, like going around trying to like make as much money as I could. And I wasn't really living in a home where I didn't have enough to eat or anything. So I don't know why I have those issues, but I do. And yeah, like I got student loan, but I hated having it. I paid it off as quickly as I could. I still remember the day that I paid it off. I was working in TV and I paid it off, and I was like so excited making that last payment. And it was way earlier than it needed to be. But I didn't want like loans and debt and stuff. It's so easy to get, but you end up paying so much more for a product than you would otherwise. So yeah, we've always made that a quite intentional path. I'm also fortunate my husband has a very similar kind of spending habits and views, so that has really helped. And we have tried, because we know that we both work in an environment where it's not a stable corporate job, even though I'm going to just say an aside there, like there is no such thing as a stable corporate job. Like you can
Thank you
get
for saying that. That is true. There is no such thing as a stable. That is no longer relevant. So
No.
the side hustle is your new job security. Agreed.
No, like it's the thing that drives me crazy is I've seen when I worked in TV for 7 years, they had 2 rounds of retrenchments. I was fortunate that I wasn't in one of those retrenchments, but there's no reason I couldn't have been. Like you really can't rely on that, which is why I always have had a side hustle. Even now, I feel like I kind of have a side hustle on top of my main job. But I think then also, I mean, one of the things, we do have a home loan, but one of our main goals is to pay that home loan off as fast as we can ahead of time. And so we're always like squirreling money away into our home loan whenever we can. And some of that money we then had to take out and use during COVID, but it was there as a backup, and we're back to squirreling money away as we can. And the same with cars. Like I've driven a 15-year-old car, and my car's currently 15 years old. It was the car that I bought like as when I had my first TV job, and I only actually bought a new car because my previous one was stolen. But most people wouldn't want to be driving around a 15-year-old car. But it's been part of actually giving us financial freedom, is that if I don't have work, we're not trying to pay off a car on top of everything else. And that's our goal too with paying off a house as soon as possible, is we both believe it'll give us more freedom in terms of the work that we do, and that it will be easier to turn down work that we don't think is directly suited to us, because we won't be thinking, oh, but I need to pay off a house, and if I don't pay off the house, where am I going to live? The worst thing happens. So yeah, having that financial, I think making wise financial decisions, not overextending yourself in terms of debt, living below your means, is one of the best things you can do if you feel like an unconventional or even a conventional career path is for you. It's definitely the thing that will give you the most freedom in your career, because you can turn around and walk away from an unhealthy culture in an environment, or from an unhealthy client, without being like, but if I walk away from this, I'm going to be in financial ruin.
Wendy, this is why I'm interviewing you, because we are spiritual sisters, we are energy sisters, we are passion sisters. It's just, you are speaking my language. And I'm so glad that you actually are a real life example of why this is necessary. So I want to touch a bit more on this revenue aspect. What I find really interesting about your work, and I'm yet to get there, but you're going to help me because you always are further along the path than me, is how did you secure your global clients? Because you work primarily with global clients, so it's great to be earning in dollars and euros and whatever else versus rand. How did you secure those global clients, and what did you have to do to maybe adjust your current workspace to adapt to their needs?
Yes, I think two things there is, I think sometimes people look at somebody like me and they don't realize that I'm a lot further down the path than they are. So if you just graduated, chances of you finding global clients is probably going to be quite difficult. I think there is not some value, a lot of value in actually trying to get into a traditional workplace for some period of time. And a lot of the skills that I have that then gave me access into global clients were because of the work that I did in TV as well as in the nonprofit later. So that span, which was probably about 10 years of more formal career experience, actually then gave me the platform to take a more unusual direction, because a lot of the work that I did in the nonprofit, it was across time zones, across regions. We were connected with a nonprofit in Chicago, and that gave me the skills that then when I went out on my own, I discovered that I was actually in a very small niche of people who had that experience. And so then when I was speaking to nonprofits and they were looking for people like me, I was able to say, well, I actually have this experience. I've worked across time zones. I've worked with teams in remote locations. I've done remote work, as I say, when I was starting out on my own, and this was 2017. We hadn't had COVID. People were still a little bit scared of remote work. And so all of those things actually gave me the platform to do it. So I think knowing where you want to go is great, but then also realizing that sometimes you actually are going to need the experience that comes through a formal work environment, through learning how to navigate conflict in a formal work environment. There's so many things that those kind of environments when you're not on your own teach you that you don't get as an individual, kind of just navigating stuff on their own. I see it, I'm going to give my brother as an example. He's only ever worked in very small organizations of less than 3 people, so him and 2 others. And he lacks some of the corporate skills or those kind of skills that you would need, and he knows he does, because he hasn't had that. So I think don't be scared. Don't listen to this today and be like, oh, well, now I'm not going to work at a corporate, or I'm not going to work in a bigger organization. I think there's a lot to learn there that you can take into things. And then, in terms of some of the adjustments that I've had to make, especially for the global clients, that's been around things like global clients don't understand load shedding. So having to actually, we're investing in solar now because the load shedding has been increasing. And so we're investing in solar so we don't have to explain to our clients, sorry, we've got load shedding, we can't join a call, or we can't do those kind of things. We've been working with UPSs for a while, but now we need to move to the next level. So I think it's also just, if you have a global mindset, you then need to start thinking, how can I make sure that I am professional on the same level as my counterparts, which in some ways are your competition, in a foreign country.
Wendy, I think what I got from that is your kind of formula to the unconventional pathway, right? So I'm going to read it out based on my interpretation. You tell me if I've got it correctly. The first stage is exploration. So kind of testing out a few things. Do I want to study this? Oh, no, I don't want to study this. Let me figure out where to go. And then your second stage is growth. So I'm growing in a specific career path, for example, TV. Okay, I'm bored. What's the next thing? So I'm growing my skill sets. Then the third stage is discovery. So actually, I want to work in this kind of environment. I want to do this type of work that's different from what I've done before. And the fourth stage would be mastery, which is where you're at the moment of, I can now actually connect with clients that I want to work with. I do the work that I find engaging and interesting and exciting, and I can say no to work that I don't want to do. But now this formula, Wendy, based on what you've experienced and myself, is a 20 to 25 year process, right? You start out in your early career, and then you shift into your mid-career, which is where we're at the moment. So I've also been working for 23 years now. First job at the age of 17, straight out of my high school, studying part-time, doing what we can. So I think that's what I want to bring across, is that you can't avoid this process. There's no short circuit, there's no shortcut to this process. You have to develop character. You have to also kind of allow yourself the time to figure out, who am I? What kind of work makes me come alive, and how do I follow that? Did I get that correctly?
Yeah, I'm very impressed. I would never have been able to put it into that kind of stages. The one thing that I would add to it is that I feel like that cycle continues all the time. I don't think, like, I wouldn't say like now I'm in mastery, so I don't explore anymore. 2 years ago, I went and did a master's in a completely different field because I wanted to explore. I wanted options. I wanted new things. Right now, I'm busy learning 2 languages, doing a drawing course, and another online course because I want to explore and I want to do those growth and things like that. And I want to have future options for areas that I need to become a master in, especially nowadays. I mean, we're living longer. I don't expect that in 20 years time, I'm going to stop working. I expect that I probably have another 40 years worth of work ahead of me, as scary as it is. I'd love to retire young. But that means like I'm already actually starting to think of, oh, if normal retirement age is at 65, then what are the skills that I need to be developing now and exploring now that I can have begun to master at 65 that are going to be valuable at that stage? So I think the only thing I change about the model that you mentioned there is that you can, at any point, you can start that explore phase again. And it can carry on to mastery, even if you are mastering another area.
I love that, Wendy. You've just described the epitome of lifelong learning, and also touching on the fact that even the idea of retirement is shifting, because my husband and I are both of the opinion that retirement is a man-made concept and not one that we ascribe to, because how do you retire from your life? Once you found the work that makes you come alive, thing you're passionate about, how do you stop being that person? How do you stop doing it? So I love that you're really thinking about, at that stage, what will I need to learn? How will I need to grow? And I think the fact that you are doing all these things at the same time and continually building that, you're keeping your brain alert and active. And so by the time you get to 65, that brain is still going to be strong, right? And so I think that's an awesome thing that you've added. Thank you so much for that. My last question, and I could interview you for hours really, but my last question is, most people want to make a change. That's why they're watching this webinar today or watching the YouTube video, but they're too afraid of the risk. Maybe they don't have the support structure, or they just don't know how to do it, or they're in debt. So what advice would you give to both groups, those who are fearful and those who are just not sure how to make the next step?
Yeah, so I think if you're fearful, one of the things that I always do is I try to think of what's the worst thing that could happen in the scenario, and don't just think about it, like literally go and write it down. And you can take it all the way to like the end where you could end up homeless, living with a cardboard box full of blankets. I mean, if that's the worst thing that you feel could happen, like write it down. Don't be like, oh, the worst thing that I think could happen, and make it sound nice for yourself. Like actually go in and face your fear. Think about what's on the other side of that fear. Think about what would happen if you ended up sleeping under a cardboard box. What would you do? What would your steps be? Like, how would you get out of it? And just really explore that, because I think sometimes we feel fearful, but we haven't actually thought about what it is that we feel, what that looks like, or how we get out of it. And I find that I often end up with I would end up having to sell a house and I'd end up under a cardboard box. So I often get to that point. So I know that feeling. But I think it's never actually happened. Like, and even the people, I do know people who it's happened to, if they've had this drive, then you speak to them and you find out that they did steps and things that they thought about they could actually do, and they could achieve, and they could get out of there, and they could get back up on their feet. So, and I say I've never been homeless, but there was actually a period when I ended up sleeping on a balcony in someone's house on a reed mat for 2 months because I had nowhere else to stay. So I haven't lived on the street, but I have like hit that like rock bottom. But I think, yeah, that's about getting back up. And yeah, if you're too scared after you've done that exercise, then actually maybe it's not the right time for you, and stay where you are. But I would suggest then start exploring. And this is the same thing suggestion I'd give to anyone who's uncertain, is start the side hustle. Like, and think about what your dream is and start that. So if you're really afraid and you're like, well, I can't quit my job and go do this, maybe it's not the best time for it. Like maybe you would end up on the streets and you wouldn't be able to cope with that. So then start doing the side hustle, start practicing. Like I said, I've almost always had a side hustle, something that I'm earning money from that's unrelated to my core business. And if that's your dream, like start doing it, figure it out. I remember I listened to an interview with Rashida Jones, and she's an actress, and she said her dad said to her, always be good at two things. And that really, when I heard that, I was like, yeah, that's what I always tried to do. Like, and she was saying, like, so she decided to be good at being an actor and being a playwright, so that she'd always have those two different streams of income. And so that's always been my thing, is like, what are the two things that I can be good at? Like, what's my fallback? And so if you're afraid or uncertain, I'd say figure out what your fallback is and start doing it. And what's the worst that can happen? Like, it doesn't work out. And the other just thought around this is that nothing is permanent. I think we tend to think, like, if I leave my job and I try out this new way of doing things, like, and it doesn't work out, that's the end of it. But what I've learned in life is that if I try out something and it doesn't work out, I can normally go back to where I was before. There are very few things in life where you actually can't go back. Maybe if you leave your job, you won't be able to go back to that job. But if you're really good at what you do, you'll probably find another job somewhere else. So I think that can also sometimes like take away our fears, actually just that realization that I always say you're not a tree, you can move. Like, and so yeah, things aren't permanent. Try things out. If they don't work, go back to what you were, or a different state, or try something else out. But yeah, don't be put off by the idea that this is an irreversible decision that you're making.
Thank you, Wendy. I think, yeah, I just want to reiterate the fact that we are not telling people to leave your job. So don't watch this webinar or watch the YouTube video and think Cheryl and Wendy have done it. I'm going to just go and quit my job now because I can't take it anymore. Please don't do that. We cannot pay for anyone's rent or grocery bills. What we are trying to do is to inspire you to see what are the possibilities. So previously, our parents used to tell us, figure out what you want to do in life and follow the one path. Either you're a doctor or a nurse or a teacher or a writer or whatever, and that's all that you do. And what is evolving now, and it's actually very exciting, it can be scary for entrepreneurs, I think, who are kind of, that's their natural bent. It's very exciting and exhilarating because it's constant change. But for those who are scared of change, that it can be daunting. But there are opportunities that you can find in the way that things shift. So instead of one pathway that you're going to follow, there's other things. So what we want to try and do and encourage you to do is think about, what skill sets do I have? What passions do I want to pursue? And how can I do that while having a job? And actually, if you are trying to build your own business while you have a full-time job, obviously be very conscientious about that. Don't do any work while you're at your job. Obviously, this is a weekend and after work kind of thing. But once you start learning about, how do I create a product? How do I brand it? How do I make a sale? How do I get customers? How do I keep customers? Those insights that you're learning into developing your side hustles actually help you to be better at your current job. Why is that? It's because you start actually seeing the sales cycle. You start actually seeing all the effort it takes to actually bring in money and what things actually affect the bottom line. So it makes you a better worker. So if just for that, I would encourage you to do it. Wendy, my last question for you, and it's been bugging me from the time we started. You started out by making necklaces when you were 12, you said. Is that a handmade necklace or did you buy that?
No, this is a bought one. I don't make necklaces anymore. I did just want to add to what you were saying now, though, about not needing to leave your job. I know lots of people who've worked in corporates for a long time and they love it, and they're never going to be somebody who changes, and they'll either go from corporate to corporate or they'll stay in the corporate. One thing that's also worth thinking about, though, is whether you're able to shape the role that you want within your corporate. So I know people who've actually like carved out entire roles that never existed in their corporate before, based on their passions, their skills, their values. And it's not possible in every organization. A lot of that will come down to finding the right organizational fit for you and your culture. But I think sometimes too, we go, oh, well, you have to be an entrepreneur to get to do the things that you want. But there's also the idea of being an intrapreneur, which is an entrepreneur within an organization. And that also, I think, if I'd found an organization that allowed me to do some of the things I've seen some of the intrapreneurs that I know doing, I might have stayed with them just as well. So I think, like you're saying, they're different pathways. And that's another different pathway, is that sometimes you don't need to leave an organization to do what you want. Sometimes you can create great impact and great societal impact actually doing it within a corporate that has great reach and resources.
I think that's so vital that you mentioned that, Wendy. I think that people who are watching this who are in a corporate and thinking, but I don't want to leave my job, Cheryl. How do I actually kind of build my passions here? And now heaving a sigh of relief that they can stay there and actually grow their careers in the corporate space. Something I wanted to just mention is thank you for talking about being an entrepreneur. I have written an article about that, so I'll link to that article in the comment section. But also, because I am entrepreneurial, I saw that in my roles, I never really worked for big corporates, but more in the kind of higher education space and the MPO space. I would use my creativity and my innovation to drive certain projects. Obviously, as much as I could within a bureaucratic environment, and that is really why I left the higher education space, is because the environment itself was not really open to change and innovation. And so I need to see things move along. I need to see the effect of my work and not be in a meeting 2 years later and still talking about the same thing. Drive me crazy. So for some people, there will be that state of like, I actually love what I do. I know what I want to do, but I can't do it in this environment. And there will be those who say, I really love this. I can see how this can develop and change. And actually, companies that are agile will be open to helping employees create their own roles and functions. So thank you for saying that. Wendy, it's been an awesome time chatting to you. I'm sure people are now understanding why I think that you're a phenomenal woman, even if you don't want to admit that. You're so humble. But thank you so much for your time. Any closing comments you'd like to share with our viewers today?
Thanks so much, Cheryl. It's been great just having this and reflecting on this journey for myself. I think sometimes we don't do that. So yeah, I don't think there's any like parting words of wisdom. The one thing that I actually have thought of that I didn't mention was something that I would encourage you to do is write down what you want your life to look like. So take the time. My husband and I have done that together. We've done that on our own. What are the values that you want? I think that's really helpful, not so much as like a goal, but actually to help you recognize when you achieve it. And I think that's quite important. So yeah, that would be my last little parting shot is write down what you want.
Thank you so much, Wendy. And if you need help with that, any coaching around your career path or just your life in general, we do have a special course called Discovering Your Purpose, and we help you to have the 4 kind of purpose circles, as we call it, to kind of fill that in and to chart your course. So we look at identity, passions, ability, and your dreams. So we can help you with that as well. I'll give you information about that as well in the comments, but thank you so much for watching today. And Wendy, you've been a star. Thank you.